In this video, we're going to be talking about how you can build simple cedar raised garden beds. And in my version, I built it with an arch over the top with lattice on the sides because I plan to have things with vines growing up them. If you don't want that or don't need that, then I'll also give you a version where you can build it without the arch over the top. So the first thing I want to talk about is why you would use cedar. Number one is that cedar is naturally rot resistant, so it's not going to decay and rot as fast sitting outside in the weather and elements. It'll generally last 15 to 30 years depending on your situation. The second thing is that there are no added chemicals unlike treated lumber. So landscape timbers are very common for people to use in raised garden beds, but they are treated with chemicals, creosote and other chemicals like that are going to leach into your soil. And if you're growing vegetables or something that you're going to eat, you might not want to do that. So you might consider some alternatives like cedar or untreated wood. Number three is that it's more likely to repel insects. So there are a lot of things that like to eat wood, like termites and that kind of stuff. And cedar generally is more repellent to insects. It's also less likely to warp, so with the rain, heat, cold, and all that kind of stuff, your boards will stay pretty straight. And the fifth thing is that cedar generally looks pretty nice and has a good smell to it, so aesthetically you'll have a good looking garden bed. Next up, we're going to be going through the materials list with and without the arch so that you have your options in case you decide to do either one. And this makes 2 garden beds, so all these materials will make you 2 beds. So the first thing is going to be 6 cedar 12 by 1s. Or 2 inches is actually preferred, but my lumber store didn't have 2-inch thick, so I went with 1. And I use 10-foot long boards, so you can use 10-foot, 12-foot, whatever you want to do, however long you want to make them. I went for 10-foot, so my beds were actually 5-foot by 10-foot. Then you're going to need 8 cedar 2x4s. These are $10 each. 4 metal stakes to secure the beds in place. 1 small box of exterior screws, like 1.5 inch exterior screws. 1 small box of exterior screws 3-inch, and that'll be more for building the arch. And then 3 sheets of lattice 4x8 to cover the arch itself. And then you'll need lots of dirt to level and fill everything out. And I'm going to leave the price of dirt out for now. I'll talk more about that later, but that varies drastically. You can spend $10, you can spend $500. It just kind of depends what you decide to use. So I'll talk more about that later. So all in all, the total price came out to $291 for 2 beds with the arch, or $145 a piece. So if you decide to build it without the arch, the difference is you're just going to have a cut down version of the list. So instead of 8 cedar 2x4s, you're going to have 1, and then you're not going to need the 3-inch box of screws, and you're also not going to need those sheets of lattice. So your total price to build these 2 garden beds without the arch is going to be $136 or $68 a piece. As far as tools, you're going to need a drill, of course, because we're screwing the wood together. You're also going to need a miter saw, circular saw, or table saw, just something to cut. I had a miter saw and a circular saw, and I got the job done. You also need a step ladder. It came in handy for attaching the lattice if you're doing the arch. And then also a hacksaw came in handy for cutting my stakes down. If you have a little shorter stakes, you might not need it. So the first phase is going to be building the actual garden beds. And the first step of that is going to be to kind of find your area and level it out a little bit. I went ahead and added some topsoil here. I have a lot of low spots in my yard and it's pretty uneven. So I brought some dirt in. You can also dig out a little bit if you want to dig out instead to kind of get your beds evened up. Whatever you want to do, just level out the area a little bit. So now we picked our spot, leveled it all out. What we're going to do is cut 6 1-foot long pieces of 2x4. And that's if you're building the arch. If you're not building the arch, go ahead and cut 8 1-foot pieces of 2x4. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and cut the end pieces. I cut mine 5 foot long, so I ended up having 5 foot wide garden beds. That is a little bit wide. 4 foot's probably ideal so that you have a better reach across your garden beds. But I had 10 foot long lumber, so I just cut it in half and ended up with 5 foot wide, which isn't a big deal. You just have it's a little harder to reach the middle of them. So the next thing we're going to do here is go ahead and join together our corners, and we're going to take the 1-foot long pieces of 2x4 that we cut and set those on the inside of the corners, and then we'll screw each side into the 2x4s. And you can use a few screws here. Just make sure you shoot one towards the top, one towards the bottom, and one towards the middle. I actually, in this video, I only shot a couple in just to hold it up, but I did go back afterwards and add in quite a few more screws just to make everything really nice and sturdy. So the next phase is going to be building the arch. If you're not going to put the arch in your garden beds, then go ahead and skip to phase 3 since you don't need to worry about this part. The first thing we're going to do for the arch is cut 1 board 46 inches to go across the top here, and then connect 2 2x4s together using that board. And I shot 3-inch screws through the side here to attach everything, and they work pretty well. Then just go ahead and do the same thing for the other side, and this will be the left and right sides of the arch. After you build the frame, go ahead and cut two about 1 foot long pieces right here with 45-degree angles on them, and we'll put these in the corner to give us some support so that the arch doesn't blow over the first time it gets hit by a wind. And again, I used the 3-inch long screws here, and I also pre-drilled out the holes. If you don't pre-drill the holes, it's going to be really difficult to get the screws in at an angle like this. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and start attaching the arch to the garden beds here. And if you remember, if you were making the arch, I told you to only cut 6 pieces of 2x4, and that's because we're using this arch to actually be the front piece here. And then after you measure the top and bottom, go ahead and attach the back side as well, but make sure you're square before you go ahead and do that. So just measure the distance on top and measure the distance on bottom, make sure everything's equal. And then go ahead and do the same thing with the other side as well. Screw in that front side. And then we'll measure the top and bottom again, make sure we're squared up, and then we'll go ahead and fix in that back side as well. So the next thing we're going to do is cut boards to start attaching the two sides together, and the width of this is going to depend how wide you want your area to be between the two beds. I wanted about 4 foot, so I cut two 4-foot long boards, and that's what's going to be used to attach the top of the arch. And then I also cut two boards that I'm going to use to attach the bottom of the garden beds, which were 39 1/4, based on the thickness of the wood and everything. And I'll show you what to do with those in a little bit. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and attach the boards on top, and I use 3-inch long screws here. You're going to have to do a little bit of alignment with the garden beds just to get everything kind of lined up there. And then do the same thing with the back side as well. And I only shot in 1 screw here just to hold everything together, but I did go back and shoot in a couple more. Okay, the next bit here is going to be attaching the little bit smaller boards to the bottom of the garden beds. And this is going to give you some stability on the bottom as well, but that's not really the reason that I did this. The main reason is that I plan to mulch the inner area right here. And if you don't do this, what you're going to end up with is this awkwardly narrow area where grass grows. And you have to get in there and mow or weed eat. And if you go in there and mow, you're going to be blowing grass to the other side, and it's going to go up in your garden bed. Same thing if you go in there and weed eat, you're going to be flinging grass around. So instead of doing that, I put this little thing in here to keep the mulch in with this little lip, and then I went ahead and dumped a bunch of mulch in here just to keep the grass down. And this way you have a nice little path here between your garden beds, and you're not going to be getting grass and weeds growing between there that you're going to have to maintain. So really the last piece of building the arch is going to be attaching the lattice to the sides here. And for that I use 1 1/4 inch screws. You don't need very long screws since the lattice isn't very thick. Also opted to use vinyl lattice here. Typically what lumber stores will have is going to be treated pine lattice, but like I said, I didn't want to use any treated wood in this garden, so I went ahead and opted for the vinyl lattice here. I would rather have used cedar lattice, but this is what they had. And then go ahead and attach your other side as well. And the last thing you'll need to do is put a piece on top, and for that piece you'll need to cut it down a little bit depending how wide you ended up making your gap between the garden beds. For me it was about 4 feet. And I use a circular saw to cut that down. The next phase is a pretty short one, but this is going to be securing your garden beds in place. And for this, what we're going to do is use a couple of metal stakes. I use 2 on each garden bed, and I put them towards the middle of the long side of the garden bed. And in addition to securing the garden beds in place, this will also help prevent the sides from bowing out whenever you fill these with dirt. The stakes that I ended up using were about 2.5 feet long, I believe, which is kind of long for this. On the right hand side here, it was okay since I attached it to the 2x4. But on the left hand side, I wanted it to be covered by the dirt, and so I went ahead and cut that down with a hacksaw. The fourth and final phase is going to be filling your garden beds up with dirt. And this is pretty much where the real work begins and the real backbreaking starts. So you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get this much dirt to your house, first of all, and what kind of dirt you want to use and all that kind of stuff. So I'll talk a little bit more about that here. The first thing you're going to want to do is figure out how much dirt you need. And in my case, I had 5x10 garden beds, and I had 2 of them. And so usually dirt is measured in cubic yards. So if you do that in cubic yards, if you convert it, then you're looking at about 1.9 cubic yards per bed, or about 4 cubic yards total to fill both of them up to the top. And that's a lot of dirt. Dirt actually weighs quite a bit. So in my case, I bought bulk dirt. You kind of have 2 options when you're buying dirt. You can buy bulk or you can buy bagged. And if you're doing large garden beds like this where you need that much dirt, bagged isn't really an option because you're going to need a lot of trips and it's going to be super expensive. So I went with bulk dirt. And I'll talk a little bit more about where you can get bulk dirt and different types of dirt too. But in my case, I did pick it up with my truck. You can use a trailer too, but just to give you kind of a reference here, this was my truck with 1 load of dirt, and this is a pretty large load. I'd say this is probably about 2.5 cubic yards or so. Each cubic yard of dirt is going to weigh somewhere between probably 800 and 2,000 pounds, depending what kind of dirt it is. If it's topsoil, it's going to weigh a lot more. If it's dry or if it's wet, it's going to weigh more. So depending on a lot of things, it's going to be heavy though, no matter what. And so in a half-ton truck, 2.5 cubic yards, this dirt was pretty light and it was pretty dry though. But still, this is probably at least 2,000 pounds of dirt. So if you have a trailer, or I have a half-ton truck and I didn't have a trailer, a dump trailer or anything like that, so I would just went ahead and loaded it in the back of the truck. But if you have a trailer, or if you have a 3/4 ton or a 1-ton truck, then you'll have an easier time getting this to your house. If you don't have a truck or a trailer and you don't want to rent one or anything like that, you can also get bulk dirt delivered from places like Home Depot. So you can look at that too. It is pretty expensive though. Whenever I looked, it was like $300 to $500 for topsoil, and they also had some compost on there. But that's pretty expensive. So I paid about $20 for all this dirt to fill the beds. So it was super cheap for me. Your other option is to do bag dirt if you don't have a truck, or if you don't want to try to get bulk dirt, or you can't find a place to get it. But it's going to take a lot of trips to go back and forth and get all the bag dirt, since you can't load it all up at once. And not only that, it's going to cost a lot more, probably $500 to $1,000 if you try to get bag dirt, depending what kind of dirt you want to use and everything. So I definitely don't recommend doing that if you can avoid it at all. Try to rent a truck, rent a trailer, get it hauled in, whatever you can do to not have to get bag dirt. So now that you've figured out how much dirt you need and how you're going to get that dirt to your house, the next thing you need to figure out is where you're going to get the dirt from. So a couple of places I would say, one, you can look at places like lumber stores and that kind of thing, landscape supply companies and all that. They might have bulk dirt in stock, so you can get topsoil or compost there. The other thing I would say is check with your local recycling center if you have one nearby. There's actually one here, and they'll compost leaves and sticks and whatnot, and then you can get free compost from them. So I got a load of that and put it on the bottom of the beds here just to kind of fill a little bit of that. And then most of what I used was actually mushroom compost, and that's what I put on top here. So I live not too far from a mushroom factory, and I can go there and pick up mushroom compost for $10 a cubic yard. So I filled all these for about $20 because I'm pretty sure they gave me a lot more than I paid for. But that was how I filled my garden beds up, and it was super cheap, super easy, and it wasn't too much of a hassle to go get any of that. So that's pretty much it. It really isn't too complicated to build these beds, especially if you don't build the arch on top. The hardest part was really figuring out the logistics of where to get the dirt from and how to get it all to my house. I really enjoy gardening and growing things that we'll eat, and I definitely encourage everyone to give it a shot. It can help cut down on your grocery bill, teach you new skills, and it's also a step towards being self-sufficient. If you're new to gardening or just kind of thinking about trying it, you can just build one small bed and give it a try. Start with a small 4x4 garden bed and try to grow a couple of things. You don't have to start big. You can just make garden beds of any size you want. So use this video as more of a guide to give you ideas and on how you might want to make a raised garden bed. Of course, you can follow it step by step if you want to, but you can also create a billion variations of raised beds, so just kind of make it to whatever you want. Another common variation of raised garden beds is using 4x4s, so you can get cedar 4x4s and interlock them together. That's a really nice one, and it comes out looking really nice. But for the price, I don't think you can really beat this one. It was super cheap to get these. If you do cedar 4x4s, it's going to be probably at least 5 to 6x more expensive. But basically, there are just a billion ways you can create raised garden beds. So use your imagination, get creative, and come up with something that fits you and your space. Hopefully this will give you something to just get you started. That's it for now. If you found this video helpful, smash the like button for more content like this. I'll also leave a written guide with top level steps in the description below, as well as some other information to help get you started. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.